The afternoon it happened, I was sitting in the third row of a conference room I had walked into hundreds of times. I knew the lighting in that room. I knew which chair wobbled slightly near the far end of the table. I had sat through earnings reviews, client crisis calls, and year-end planning sessions in that room for 15 years. It had always felt familiar. That Friday, at exactly 3:17 in the afternoon, it felt like somewhere I had never been before. Because the slide behind Scott Peterson did not show a sales forecast or a quarterly review. It showed my name, my title, my base salary, my bonus structure, my benefits breakdown, and a total annual compensation figure of $340,000, glowing on a screen in front of 19 people. Then Scott turned to the room, tapped the number with one finger, and said I was overpaid. There was a beat of silence before anyone reacted, and in that beat, I understood something that would take Scott another 6 weeks to fully absorb. He thought he was cutting a cost. He had no idea he was standing in front of the thing that held $285 million together, treating it like a line item. I am Michael Stevens. I am 47 years old. I was, until that Friday afternoon, the Vice President of Sales Operations at Titan Industrial Solutions in Chicago. I managed 78 major manufacturing clients, built relationships that had survived recessions and supplier crises and 3 prior CEOs, and kept accounts alive through the kind of emergencies most executives only read about in incident reports. I was not some polished title behind a corner office window. I was the person clients called at 11 on a Sunday night, when a delayed European shipment was about to shut down a production line in Milwaukee. I was the one who had actually flown to Germany to fix that problem before the client had to make an impossible choice. I knew the names of their operations managers, their procurement leads, their shift supervisors. I knew which facilities ran lean and which ones had zero buffer before a delay became a crisis. For 15 years, Titan Industrial Solutions kept its clients in part because those clients trusted me. Scott Peterson had been inside Titan for 6 weeks. He had come from the consulting world, the kind of background that produces a certain kind of confidence. The belief that every problem has a chart, every department has hidden waste, and every experienced employee can be measured against an industry benchmark pulled from a database. He was brought in by the board with one clear mandate: improve margins, reduce overhead, and make Titan leaner before the next earnings cycle. To Scott, leaner meant finding numbers that looked too large and trimming them until they fit his model. That Friday, the number he decided to trim was me. His slide compared my compensation against what he called market benchmarks for similar roles. According to his data, a VP of sales operations at a company my size should have been earning somewhere between $180,000 and $220,000. He had highlighted the gap in red. He had calculated a proposed new figure, $195,000, with reduced bonus potential and several benefits removed. A 43% reduction. Not offered in a private office, not delivered in a conversation with HR present, announced to a room of 19 people, with my salary still glowing on the screen behind him. Danny Rodriguez, our chief financial officer, tried to redirect. He reminded Scott that my client relationships directly generated and protected Titan's core revenue, and that the compensation had always been structured to reflect that contribution. Scott listened with the polite patience of someone who had already made his decision, then dismissed the point. He said that every expensive executive had a story about why they were special. He said my role, in his assessment, was sales operations oversight. He used the word coordination. I want you to understand what that word felt like in that room after 15 years. Coordination. It erased the Sunday night calls. It erased the flight to Germany. It erased every conversation where I had talked a frustrated client out of switching to a competitor. Every crisis I had managed quietly before it became public. Every handshake at every industry conference that had slowly, over years, turned into the kind of trust that makes a company recession-proof. Scott looked at all of that and saw a person who organized things. I kept my voice level because that is what 15 years in executive rooms teaches you. You do not show the wound, you do not raise your voice, or let your hands move differently than normal. You keep your face as calm as if you are reading an invoice. I asked one question. How exactly am I overpaid when I personally manage $285 million in annual revenue? The room shifted. A few people looked at their laptops. Janet from HR kept writing notes without looking up. Danny looked like he wanted to speak again, but he also understood that Scott had turned this meeting into a public demonstration of authority, and that challenging it too directly would have its own consequences. Scott said, Titan's reputation generated that revenue. Titan's products, Titan's pricing, Titan's infrastructure. My role was coordination. I did not argue with him after that. Not because he was right, but because I understood, in that moment, that arguing with Scott in that room was not the conversation that mattered. The conversation that matters was going to happen somewhere else entirely. The meeting ran until 4:45. Scott moved through more slides, more positions he believed could be reduced or eliminated, more numbers that did not appear to him to be connected to anything except their own size. Around me, executives nodded at the right intervals. Some of them caught my eye for a half second and looked away. I want to be honest about the next few hours, because people tend to imagine moments like this as clean and dramatic, like something out of a film. The music swells, the wronged person walks out with perfect posture, and everyone watching knows exactly how it will end. The truth is messier than that. I sat in my car in the parking lot at 4:47 with 2 cardboard boxes in the back seat, and for a few minutes I did not do anything at all. I just held the steering wheel and thought about Emma at Northwestern and Sarah at DePaul and the mortgage in Naperville and what a 43% pay cut would actually mean for the life Susan and I had spent 15 years building. I thought about what it would look like to accept. I thought about my daughters watching me accept it. And then I thought about the word coordination and the way Scott had said it and the 19 people who had heard him say it. I opened my phone and scrolled to an email I had not deleted in 4 months. It was from Kevin Murphy, the Chief Executive Officer of Apex Industrial Group. Apex was Titan's most serious competitor. Kevin had been trying to recruit me for nearly 3 years. Every time he called, I gave him the same answer. I appreciated his interest, but I was loyal to Titan. That word felt like it belonged to a different person now. I pressed call. He answered on the second ring, surprised. "Michael Stevens," he said. "This is unexpected." "Do you remember the senior VP position you offered me 4 months ago?" I asked. A short pause. "Of course." "I resigned from Titan about an hour ago," I said, "and I would like to discuss it." He asked what had happened. I told him. I kept it factual. The slide, the 43% reduction, the word coordination, the deadline. Kevin was quiet for 3 seconds. Then he made a small sound that was not quite a laugh. It was the sound a person makes when they hear something so strategically self-destructive they cannot fully believe it is real. "Anyone who calls you overpaid," he said, "does not understand industrial sales. Be in my office Monday at 9. I drove home. Susan was in the kitchen when I walked in. She looked at the boxes before she looked at me. I told her everything, including the part I had not yet said out loud, that I had resigned before accepting his offer, that I had called Kevin Murphy from the parking lot, and that I did not know with certainty yet how this would land. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Good." That was it. One word. But I had been married to Susan for 22 years, and I understood exactly what she meant by it. My phone buzzed at 6:41 that evening. Ryan Anderson. Ryan was the chief executive officer of Anderson Manufacturing, Titan's single largest account. His company represented $42 million per year in contracts, and he had been my client for 12 years. He was not a man who called to chat. When Ryan called, it was because something mattered. I answered. "Michael," he said, without any preamble, "I'm hearing you left Titan today. Tell me that's not true." "It's true," I said. "I resigned this afternoon." There was a long silence on the line. Then his voice dropped in that way it did when he was working through something serious. "What happened?" I could have given him a polished answer, something careful and professional about pursuing new opportunities. But Ryan Anderson had trusted me through a supplier crisis that nearly collapsed his Milwaukee operation. And I was not going to give him the corporate version. I told him, the slide, the number, the word coordination. He exhaled slowly. "That is the single dumbest executive decision I have heard in a long time." Then he said something I had not expected.
"Michael, Anderson Manufacturing does not work with Titan because of a name on an invoice. We work with Titan because when our plant is in trouble, you answer the phone. You know our operation the way our own operations team knows it. You understand what failure cost us before we even finish explaining the problem."
I was careful. I had read my non-compete agreement twice since the parking lot. I knew exactly what I could and could not say. "Ryan, I have a non-compete clause. I cannot solicit Titan clients. I need you to know that clearly before this conversation goes any further." "You are not soliciting me," he said. "I called you, and if you are joining Apex, then my procurement team and I need to have a conversation about where our risk actually lives." I wrote it down the moment I ended the call, the time, the date, what he had said, and what I had said back. By 7:30 that evening, 6 more clients had called with some version of the same question. "Where are you going, and should we be concerned?" Every time, I said the same thing. "I cannot ask you to leave Titan. I cannot advise you to terminate any existing contracts. Whatever decision your company makes has to be independent, documented, and handled entirely through your own legal and procurement channels." Most of them did not need more than that. Brenda Mills from Midwest Fabrication said something I have not forgotten. "Titan never saved our production line," she said. "You did. If Scott thinks that relationship belongs to a company logo, he is about to learn something expensive." I kept writing everything down. Every call, every name, every timestamp. Not because I had done anything wrong, but because I already knew that when Scott Peterson looked up and saw what was happening, his first explanation would be that I had stolen it. I wanted every fact ready when that accusation arrived. By Sunday evening, I had documented 11 client calls. None of them had been initiated by me. All of them had said some version of the same thing. They did not experience Titan as a company they did business with. They experienced it as the person they called when things went wrong, and that person no longer worked there. Monday morning, I was in Kevin Murphy's office at Apex at 9 o'clock, reviewing the final terms of my new contract. Senior Vice President, Client Strategy and Revenue Development, with a base salary of $380,000, equity participation, and full authority over account management structure. Nearly $40,000 more than the number Scott had projected onto a screen 5 days earlier. Kevin had also arranged for Apex's legal team to review my non-compete in detail. They walked me through exactly what it prohibited. Direct solicitation, using confidential pricing data to poach accounts, and initiating contact with any Titan client for the purpose of inducing a contract termination. I had not done any of those things. I was not going to. What I could not control was what clients chose to do on their own. At 10:30 that same morning, my phone buzzed with a forwarded message from an old colleague still inside Titan. The subject line was, "Notice of contract termination, Anderson Manufacturing. $42 million per year. Gone." I did not celebrate. I sat with it for a moment because I understood that this was the beginning of something that was going to be much larger and much more difficult than a single contract, and not all of it was going to feel good. By noon, 4 more termination notices had arrived in Titan's inbox. Midwest Fabrication, Great Lakes Manufacturing, Halpern Components, Westbrook Industrial Supply. Each letter used careful professional language about account management continuity and supplier confidence reviews. None of them mentioned me by name. None of them had to. Scott called just after lunch. For the first time in the 6 weeks I had known him, his voice did not carry the smooth authority he wore like a uniform. "Michael, 5 major clients have sent termination notices this morning. All of them reference your departure." I kept my tone neutral. "Scott, I'm no longer employed by Titan. Client relationship management is Titan's responsibility now. These terminations look coordinated." There was that word again. "They look like consequences," I said. "You told 19 executives that my relationships were replaceable. The clients are now telling you whether they agree." There was silence on the line long enough that I checked to make sure the call had not dropped. It had not. Scott was just sitting with it. I did not enjoy the silence. I want to be clear about that. There is a version of this story where I felt triumphant in that moment, where I savored the reversal and let myself feel the satisfaction of watching someone learn an expensive lesson. But what I actually felt was tired. And beneath the tiredness was something sadder. Because 127 people worked at Titan who had nothing to do with what had happened in that conference room, and I already knew they were going to feel this before Scott did. That knowledge did not make me feel like a winner. By the end of the first week, Titan had lost 11 major clients, $147 million in annual revenue. The company had wanted to save $145,000 on my compensation. The math did not require explanation. Scott spent the next several weeks attempting to stop the damage in the only ways he knew how. He offered extended payment terms. He authorized emergency discounts. He assigned dedicated account managers to each departing client and had them use phrases like seamless transition and institutional relationship continuity. The clients listened politely and kept sending termination notices. It was not about pricing. It was not about terms. It was not even entirely about me, though I understand that may be difficult to believe. It was about what those companies had understood for years and what Scott had failed to read. In manufacturing, trust is not transferred through a memo. It is earned during the moments no one wants to talk about. The failed shipments, the production shutdowns, the Sunday night calls. The times when a company's reputation with its own customers was at stake, and the person on the other end of the phone knew exactly what to do without being asked. That trust had been built by a specific person over a specific number of years. When that person left, the trust did not stay behind and reassign itself to whoever inherited the account file. It left too. By the end of the 3rd week, Titan's lost contracts had passed $250 million. The board, which had brought Scott in to improve margins, was now in emergency sessions trying to understand how its first major cost optimization initiative had collapsed the company's revenue base. My phone rang again, Scott's name on the screen. His voice had changed again. It was quieter than even the Monday call. Less the voice of a CEO and more the voice of a person realizing in real time that the model he had trusted had failed him in a way that could not be fixed with another slide. "Michael," he said, "we need to stop this." I looked around my office at Apex, where a stack of client onboarding files sat across my desk representing companies that had made their own independent decisions. "There is no we anymore, Scott," I said. "I don't work for Titan." He paused, then he made his offer. Full salary restored, a 40% increase above the original figure, equity participation, signing bonus, complete authority over client relationships. $476,000, and an acknowledgement, in numbers if not quite in words, that I had been worth what Titan was paying me. I almost did not say anything for a long moment. Not because I was tempted. I was settled at Apex, client momentum was already building, and Kevin Murphy had given me the kind of professional respect that does not require defense on a quarterly basis. What made me pause was something else. The recognition of how much it had cost to get to this phone call. 127 employees laid off. $250 million in revenue lost. A company that had taken 15 years to build now selling at a fraction of its worth because one man had confused the price of something with its value. "Scott," I said finally, 3 weeks ago, you stood in front of 19 executives and told them my work was administrative coordination. I understand now that the situation was more complex than the benchmarks suggested. "No," I said. "You understand loss. That is not the same as understanding complexity." I told him I had already accepted my position at Apex, that I had client engagement proposals from dozens of companies who had made their own decisions, that I had a team, a structure, and a company that understood revenue is not created by spreadsheets alone. "I wish Titan well," I said, "but I am not coming back to rescue a company that needed to lose hundreds of millions of dollars before it recognized what it had." The board removed Scott Peterson at the end of the second month. The official language was measured and careful, as those announcements always are. Strategic misjudgment regarding executive talent retention and client relationship management continuity. But everyone in our industry understood what had happened. Scott had looked at a revenue-generating relationship structure, identified the most visible cost at the center of it, and cut it without understanding what that cost was protecting. Titan was acquired the following year at less than half of its pre-Scott valuation. Meanwhile, Apex was growing faster than any quarter in recent memory. My first months there were not glamorous. I want to be honest about that too. There were weeks of difficult onboarding work, legal coordination, supply chain realignment, new pricing structures, and the patient, careful process of assuring clients that the transition would not put their operations at risk. I worked harder than I had in years. I arrived early and stayed late and spent weekends reviewing account files and call logs and status reports. But I was doing it in a place where my judgment was trusted, where my calls were answered, where no one had put my career on a projector screen and asked 19 people whether I was worth it. By the end of my first full quarter, Apex had formal contracts with 35 former Titan clients, 8 new clients who had heard what had happened and wanted to understand whether Apex handled its people the way it handled its accounts, and a combined annual revenue of $312 million. I remember sitting with that report late one evening, after everyone else had gone home. The number was larger than anything I had managed at Titan. But the number was not what I sat with. What I sat with was this. Not a single one of those clients had come because I had asked them to. Every one of them had made their own decision, through their own legal and procurement process, based on a simple calculation. Where does the trust actually live? And they had followed it. 18 months after I walked out of Titan's parking lot with 2 cardboard boxes, I received an email from an old colleague with a subject line that made me set down my coffee. You are officially a business school case study now. The attached document was a teaching case that had begun circulating through executive education programs and leadership seminars. The title was direct enough to be painful: the $145,000 cost cut that destroyed $285 million in revenue. I read it in full. It was not a flattering document for anyone involved, including me, in ways I had not anticipated. The case asked students to think about how I had handled the non-compete, whether I had done enough to discourage client movement, and whether my resignation had been strategically timed in ways that, while legal, raised questions about professional responsibility. I sat with those questions too. But the central lesson the professors drew from it was this: Scott Peterson had confused compensation with value, and he had done so publicly in a way that made it impossible for the relationship between the company and its most important people to survive. He had treated a revenue-protecting relationship structure as overhead, because overhead is a category that appears on a spreadsheet, and the trust that holds client accounts together does not. When you cannot see something on a slide, it is easy to assume it is not there. It is much harder to assume that after it has walked out the door. My daughters called that weekend. Both of them had heard about the case study through a professor at their respective schools. Emma called it surreal. Sarah said a classmate had used the story in a leadership class presentation and had gotten the best grade she had earned that semester. I did not know how to feel about my humiliation becoming a teaching tool. I am still not entirely sure how I feel about it. What I know is this: today, the screenshot of Scott Peterson's presentation still hangs in my office. Not out of bitterness, not as a trophy. It hangs because it is an honest reminder of something I think about when young professionals come in and ask me what actually protects a business. Not always the product, not always the pricing, not always the brand name on the contract. Sometimes it is the person who answers the phone at midnight, who remembers which production line cannot absorb a 2-day delay, who understands the client's pressure before the client has finished describing it, and who has spent years earning the right to be the first call when everything is about to go wrong. Scott Peterson thought he was cutting a cost. What he cut was the infrastructure no slide had ever been able to show him, because it was built in conversations and emergencies and Sunday night phone calls that never made it into any quarterly report. And once that infrastructure walked out the door, every discount in the world could not bring it back. If this story stayed with you, I would love to hear from you in the comments. Would you have stayed and accepted the cut? Or would you have walked? Have you ever worked somewhere that did not understand your value until it was too late? Tell me below. And if you believe that the most dangerous number on any spreadsheet is the one that gets cut before anyone understands what it is protecting, subscribe to the channel for more stories about real people, real stakes, and the kind of quiet justice that does not always arrive loudly, but always eventually arrives.